Applause. The red and blue lights flashed, casting their eerie glow. They pulsed against the locked gate, throwing long, looming shadows across the pavement beneath me. I stood there, on my porch, arms crossed, observing the scene unfolding before me. Two officers stepped out of their cruiser, and my neighbor Karen was already in full performance mode, arms flailing dramatically as she demanded justice for what she insisted was a community emergency. I could already feel the predictable script playing out in my mind before the first word even left the officers' mouths. Karen had done this before, her routine was well-rehearsed. But this time, something felt different. Something about her urgency seemed desperate. "Sir," the older officer, his badge reading Sergeant Doyle, called out as he approached, "we've received a report of an unauthorized obstruction on what might be a public access road." I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temple. "It's not a public road," I replied flatly. "It's my driveway, private property. I have every right to block it off." Karen scoffed, her voice dripping with indignation. "That's not true. This road has always been open. People use it all the time. You can't just block it off." "People use it because they don't respect property lines," I shot back quickly. "That doesn't make it theirs." Her face flushed even deeper with rage. The younger officer, his tag reading Rivera, glanced down at a thick folder of documents on my patio table. "Mr. Bishop, do you have proof of ownership?" I picked up the deed to my property and held it out toward him. "Right here. This driveway has been private property since the house was built. Nothing's changed except that I've finally gotten tired of people treating it like a public road." Doyle skimmed the papers for a moment before asking, "Then why the fuss now?" Karen crossed her arms, her face now an impressive shade of red. "Because he blocked off something people have been using for years. What if there's an emergency? What if emergency services need to get through?" I pointed at the street. "There's a public road right there, Karen. This isn't the only way in or out of the neighborhood." Doyle sighed and handed my documents back to me. "Legally, he's right. If it's private property, he has the right to restrict access." Karen's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "What? Are you serious?" "This isn't over," Rivera interjected, still skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, why now? Why close it off all of a sudden?" I hesitated for a moment. That was the real question, wasn't it? Because for years, I had put up with people cutting through my driveway as though it were their own personal shortcut. But then, a week ago, everything changed. I had been digging near the far end of my property, planning to expand my workshop when my shovel struck something solid, concrete. But not just any concrete. Smooth, reinforced, and deep. Curious, I dug a little further, uncovering what looked like the edge of a sealed tunnel buried beneath decades of dirt and neglect. And the moment I found it, that's when things started happening. That night, my security cameras captured something strange. Two men in dark clothing, walking along my driveway. They weren't neighbors. They weren't police. They stopped exactly where I had been digging, stood there for a moment, then disappeared into the night. The next morning, I found my fence tampered with. The lock, which I had installed myself, had been clipped and hastily replaced with another. But I hadn't done it. I rewound the footage again, frame by frame. At 3:27 a.m., two figures emerged from the shadows. One held bolt cutters. The other crouched low, pressing his hands against the dirt where I had been digging, as if searching for something. Then, as silently as they appeared, they vanished. Later that day, I overheard Karen talking to another neighbor. Her voice was hushed, urgent, not just mad about the driveway anymore. She sounded scared. I watched her from my porch, noticing how she kept glancing nervously toward my house, toward the spot where I had been digging. Did she know something I didn't? I didn't tell Karen any of this. Instead, I simply shrugged. I was tired of people trespassing. It was time to set some boundaries. Doyle studied me carefully, but didn't say a word. Rivera, however, still wasn't convinced. "Mind if we take a look at where you've closed it off?" he asked. I gestured toward the gate. "Be my guest." The two officers walked over, inspecting the heavy-duty steel barrier I had installed. It was new, freshly put up last week, and solid enough to keep out anything short of a battering ram. Karen hissed, her voice dripping with suspicion. He's hiding something. Why else would he suddenly block the driveway off? I turned to her, lowering my voice. Karen, I built this gate because I don't want people on my property anymore. And you have no right to tell me otherwise. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes, uncertainty, fear, or something else. Then, as if on cue, a black SUV slowly rolled past the street, cruising past my house. It didn't stop. It didn't linger. But I saw it. And I noticed the way Rivera's jaw tightened when he saw it too. That night, after the police left and Karen stormed back into her house, I sat in my workshop, reviewing the security footage again. The SUV had circled my block 3 times. Once at 9 p.m., again at midnight, and then at dawn. I didn't recognize the plates, but something told me I wasn't supposed to. As I stared at the screen, a chill ran down the back of my neck. I had spent the past week convincing myself that this was just paranoia, that I had imagined the figures in the night, the clipped lock, the strange unease in Karen's eyes. But watching that SUV creep past my house again and again, I knew the truth. Something was going on, and somehow I had just placed myself right in the middle of it. The sound of the SUV's engine faded into the night, but the tension in my chest remained. I stayed at my desk, staring at the footage, my fingers tapping absently against the armrest of my chair. 3 times in one night, this wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was watching me, and they weren't trying very hard to hide it. I exhaled slowly, shutting off the screen before my paranoia could get the best of me. I needed sleep, but my gut told me that this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to a sharp knock on my front door. My pulse shot up even before I opened my eyes. I rolled out of bed, threw on a t-shirt, and made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw Rivera standing on my porch, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Not exactly the wake-up call I wanted. I opened the door just enough to see him. "Officer, something I can help you with." Rivera didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the driveway, then back at me. "Can we talk inside?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't waste time, striding into my living room like he already knew the layout of the house. I shut the door and watched as he turned back to me, lowering his voice. "I need you to tell me exactly what you found." My muscles tensed. "You saw TH. It's my property. What I do with it is none of your business," I snapped, trying to maintain control of the situation. Rivera sighed, rubbing his jaw as he took a step closer. "Look, I know what the law says, but something doesn't sit right. I know you're not telling me everything. And after last night, I need to know if you're in danger." I narrowed my eyes, the unease in my chest growing. "What do you mean, after last night?" I asked, my voice more defensive than I intended. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and started swiping through the screen. After a few seconds, he held it up for me to see. The image was grainy, taken by his dash cam in the dead of night. It showed a black SUV parked 2 blocks away from my house. The timestamp read 4:17 a.m. My jaw tightened. "You followed them?" I asked, my voice low, almost incredulous. Rivera shook his head. "I was patrolling the neighborhood when I spotted the SUV on my camera. It seemed off, so I ran the plates, no registration. It doesn't exist in any database." A chill ran down my spine. "So, whoever's in that car isn't just some curious neighbor?" Rivera nodded, his expression grave.
"Exactly.
"And that's why I need you to tell me everything. What did you find under that driveway?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I could lie. I could pretend it was nothing, but deep down I knew that wouldn't help me. I couldn't escape this mess alone. I walked over to the patio door, pulling back the curtain, my finger pointing toward the far end of my property. "It's not just a driveway," I said, my voice quieter. "There's something underneath it, some kind of structure. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's old, and it was sealed off, intentionally." Rivera followed my gaze, his face unreadable. "And you uncovered it?" "Part of it." I nodded, reluctant but truthful. "Enough to know it wasn't meant to be found." Rivera exhaled slowly, his face hardening. I need to see it.
Now.
I tensed. That's not a good idea, I warned, my voice low. And why is that? Rivera asked, his brow furrowing. Because, I turned back to face him, someone else doesn't want it to be seen and they're watching. For the first time, Rivera looked genuinely unsettled. He glanced toward the window, his hand instinctively brushing against his holster. You think whoever was in that SUV knows what you found? I don't know, I muttered, my chest tightening. Rivera was silent for a moment, then took a deep breath. Then we need to move fast. Show me now. I hesitated. Letting him see meant pulling him deeper into this mess, but keeping it to myself meant facing it all alone. And after what happened last night, I knew that wasn't going to work. Not anymore. All right, I finally said, the weight of my decision settling in. But if we're doing this, we do it my way. No backup, no radio calls, just us. Rivera's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Lead the way. As we stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were still upon me. Whoever was watching wasn't done yet, and neither was I. I led Rivera toward the back of the property, each step deliberate, careful. The early morning air was still, unnervingly quiet. Even the birds seemed to avoid this part of my land. I crouched down near the disturbed earth where I had started digging days ago, pulling back the tarp I had placed over the site. Beneath it, the smooth concrete gleamed faintly under the weak sunlight, untouched by time. Rivera knelt beside me, running his fingers along the seam of the concrete. This isn't normal. You're right, I murmured, a sense of dread creeping over me. And that's the problem. Rivera pressed his palm against the surface, his frown deepening. It's cold. Not just from being underground. This thing, it's insulated. Reinforced. My stomach dropped. Then it's not just an old bunker, I said, the weight of the realization sinking in. It's something else. Rivera stood up abruptly, scanning the tree line as if searching for someone or something. His jaw clenched tightly. Someone built this for a reason, and they didn't expect anyone to find it. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. You think it's military's? I asked, my voice tense. Could be, Rivera replied. Or something else entirely. Either way, you shouldn't be anywhere near it. I stared at him, incredulous. Now you sound just like the guys in that SUV. Just forget about it, right? Walk away. Rivera held my gaze, but something had shifted in his expression. There was something new there, a flicker of fear. I'm saying, he lowered his voice, you might not have a choice. I didn't like the way he said that. The way his voice dropped just enough to make it sound less like a suggestion and more like a warning. I exhaled slowly, my breath visible in the cool morning air. If I don't have a choice, I said, then someone's going to make sure I don't. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, making every movement feel heavier than before. Rivera stepped back from the uncovered concrete, shaking his head slowly. This isn't just some abandoned structure, he muttered. The way it's sealed, the way it's built. This was never meant to be found. I crouched down again, my hand running along the surface of the concrete. The material was colder than I expected, different from reinforced concrete. Beneath it, I could feel metal, dense and cold to the touch. I looked up at Rivera. Someone knew it was here. Maybe they even expected me to find it. Rivera's jaw tightened. If that's the case, then you've got a much bigger problem. I heard the low hum of an engine before I saw the vehicle. My stomach twisted as I turned toward the street. Another black SUV. Not the same one from the night before, but close enough that it didn't matter. It rolled past my house slowly, deliberately, as if the people inside wanted to make sure I saw them. Rivera tensed beside me, his hand brushing his holster instinctively. This isn't good. No kidding, I muttered under my breath. The SUV didn't stop. It just kept going, disappearing around the bend. But I knew better than to think that meant I was in the clear. I turned back to Rivera. Tell me you got the plate this time. He pulled out his phone, checking his dash cam feed. The image was blurry, but still legible. He muttered the numbers under his breath before freezing. What is it? I asked, watching the color drain from his face. It's registered to a government fleet, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But there's no department listed. No agency. Just a blank record. My chest tightened, panic setting in. So, whoever they are, they don't want to be found. Rivera put his phone away, exhaling slowly. If they know we're looking, they'll escalate. You need to be careful. I stared at the concrete slab, my gut screaming that I was already in too deep. What do you think is down there? I asked. Rivera didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with something almost like pity. I don't know, he finally said. But I don't think you're ready to find out. I stood up, dusting off my hands, my mind already made up. Ready or not, I don't think I have a choice anymore. If they wanted to keep this a secret, they shouldn't have made it so obvious. Rivera shook his head, his eyes hardening. You don't get it. They don't care if you know. They care if you talk. And if they think you might be a problem, they won't hesitate to make you disappear.